Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to go over some of the big questions we got in the open garden event that we had this past weekend. So there were probably maybe 6 to 8 questions that just came up over and over and over again about the garden and a few of the items that are in the garden. So I thought it'd be interesting to go through some of those and talk about them. But one thing I wanted to show off here is how many people were so generous, showing up with a few, with some gifts. Not that we would have ever in a million years expected of anyone to have brought us anything. There ended up being over 800 people between, on Friday we were open from 3 to 7 and there was a big crowd from maybe 3 to 5 on Friday. I mean, a really, really big crowd. And then on Saturday we were open from 8 to 3. And so it was never quite as cramped in here as it was in that little bit of time on Friday, but it's still over the course of the day, it was a lot of people. A lot of people came wearing some of the older t-shirts that I had on the channel, so that was really nice to see people walking up who had bought t-shirts in the past. And then those of you who came, we sold an amazing amount of t-shirts, so thank you so much for doing that. We really appreciate it. We had just an incredible group of people here in the garden. It was so nice, so nice. And I'd like to apologize to anyone that I wasn't able to talk to. If you were waiting at some point and needed, and I couldn't get to you, I apologize for that. Steph, same thing. Steph was just kind of stationed over here on the driveway and out front, and I was in the back. Saturday, my son, Charlie was here, and a friend, Doug, was here to kind of help out a little bit. But on Friday, it was Steph and I, and I'm sure that we missed talking to some folks that we would definitely have liked to have talked to you. So again, sorry if we didn't get to you. A lot of people came bearing gifts. Again, we would have never expected it in a million years, but we have wine for the adults, and then toys for the puppies, and snacks for the puppies. And folks brought us plants, seed, just an amazing, amazing group of followers on this channel. And someone made us personalized thank you notes. And Steph sends out a lot of thank you notes to a lot of the gardens we visit and that kind of thing. So it's nice having these personalized ones. And they say HT for HortTube, and then say Jim and Steph on them. So thank you very much for that. They will definitely get used. And Steph usually sends out some sort of personalized note when someone buys a t-shirt as well. It's definitely not me. You can tell by the neat handwriting. That is definitely Steph. Someone brought us hand towels and a digital picture frame, and honey that the gentleman had made, and honey soap. And someone had brought this little this little flower pot, and Steph immediately used it. It was someone brought it on Friday, and she was using it in the garden on Saturday. Brought her a fan because it was super, super hot out here. Conifers, and then again other zinnias and other plants as well. So again, we appreciate everything. And then someone painted this probably most iconic view here in our garden, and brought us the original painting, and she's going to be selling the prints of this. And if I find out any more information about that and you're interested in getting one of these prints, this is just an amazing thing. She took it off of one of our Instagram photos and painted it. It's just absolutely beautiful and definitely represents this garden like nothing else. And then lastly, a kid that came lost this little tiger, and so we still have it. And well, it was, it's kind of sad when you find a toy after everyone leaves. But there were a lot of young people in the garden too. A couple that had watched right along with their parents. One came bearing a joke that was she called me Jim Plantum. Jim Platinum, that's what it was. And it was a very little, very young girl that had come up with that joke all on her own. And so it was super, super fun. We're going to go through and tell you, just answer some of the questions to the viewers at home that we got kind of over and over and over again as people were here. One of the things I said before people got here was how many bees were here. And I think that maybe they thought I was exaggerating in some way, but this is truly a swarm of bees, and it starts early, starts about mid-morning and doesn't stop the entire day. There's just incredible amount of native, few honeybees out here, but for the most part, it's mostly all native bumblebees, carpenter bees, and leaf cutter bees, and all kinds of interesting big old fat bees that just fly. You know, if you look at this long enough, it's just an incredible number of them. Of course, the Salvia are drawing them in. And another thing that's drawing them in is the Gomphrena. And I have to say, that was probably right at the top of folks' list of questions, was about the Gomphrena. And the Gomphrena, and you know, if I take one of these off and I say, look at this flower, you're gonna be, you know, is that the most impressive thing you've ever seen? No, but in a cluster on a big plant, they're incredibly showy, and everybody wanted to know what they were. The most interesting thing about this is probably one of the least expensive things we have in the garden, because we do them from seed. And the plants, this is a small plant here. Sun has run us off a couple of the bigger ones over there, but you know, they're this big and this wide, and we just started these seeds back in February or early March, I guess probably early March. They're pretty quick to get finished, and then they just grow like crazy out here. And you get these incredible pops of color. The bees love them, and just everyone was drawn to them. So Gomphrena definitely was one of the winners of the garden tour. One of the things that really stands out in this garden to folks are that we're growing a lot of conifers that you wouldn't consider great conifers for this area. They're not the most heat tolerant things. And this, we've got a blue spruce in the back garden back there that's an example of that, but that blue spruce is only in about maybe 2 to 3 hours of direct sun every day, and then it's in the shade the rest of the time. So it's not quite as blue as it would be, but we're able to grow it. So we're thinking about the placement of the plant. And this, the green penguin pine out here at the road is a great example of that. It's not necessarily all that happy that it's going to be 97 degrees for the next 5 or 6 days, and it was 96 yesterday when we had people here in the garden. But what we've done here is what I know about this plant is it's not so much that the top of the plant is scared of the heat. It's really that its roots can get cooked. You know, we have this brown mulch, or people use black mulch or whatever to mulch around their plants. It really allows the soil to heat up during the day. So we go and buy plants, and they say they get 4 to 5 feet wide, so we come back and put them in the garden 4 to 5 feet apart, and then we surround them with brown mulch or black mulch or something like that. And then it stunts the plants a bit, and the reason it's stunting them is because it's burning the roots on them. So this green penguin pine is underplanted with this variegated sedum. This low fence behind it, which doesn't look like much, is kind of cutting off about 2 hours of direct sun late in the afternoon from the roots of this plant. There's vinca planted around it. There's an agastache that just kind of volunteered here, and there's other things around it allowing the roots to stay much cooler than they would otherwise. So if I just came out here and I planted 4 pieces across the front of this fence, and they were in 12 hours of direct sun, which this is, they would be struggling. They would be growing, well, they wouldn't necessarily be struggling, but they'd be growing much, much slower. It's one of the things about how does things grow so fast in this garden. A lot of it is the spacing and using ground covers as tools to allow the plants to really get established before they can shade their own roots later on. Right at the top of everyone's list was the sparkling burgundy pineapple lily. This eucomis was found by Plant Delights a long time ago. Probably been millions of them sold over the years. I have no idea. It's just such a great plant. Perennial for us here in our area. You see the leaves are a little bit green on it at this point. When it first came out of the ground earlier in the season, the leaves are very, very burgundy. They'll lose a little bit of that color during the heat of the summer. What the folks on the garden tour got to enjoy here, though, was the flower spikes coming up on it, which, like a lot of things in the garden, are happening a little early this year. Typically, this is a little later in the summer when the pineapple lilies decide to bloom like this, but people got to see it, and if they hadn't seen it before, they were definitely enamored with the pineapple lilies. A week or two ago, I counted the species in the garden, just a rough count, and I counted 327. I did not break the salvia down into the different species we have. And so if I just simply breaking the salvia down into all the different species, I probably jump another 20 or so species here in the garden. We have a ton of salvia, some early blooming salvia nemorosas that have bloomed out for us, maybe just be peak blooming if you're in a colder area or cooler spring area. But then we have lots of annual salvias, lots of salvias that are kind of borderline, whether they're annual or perennial here, and we leave them and hope they come back. And then some real mid-season, late season salvias that are tough as nails. Of course, rosemary's also been moved into salvia, and We have a pineapple sage as well, which is, you know, another one of those that blooms much, much later. So we basically have salvia unfolding all season long. So from late March until fall, we'll have various salvias blooming here in the garden. Well, if you're counting rosemary in the wintertime, we have a salvia blooming out here. And the pollinators, right at the top of their list for sure, for visits here in the garden. What I think people were super interested in were the different growth habits, and then the fact that you see things like the beautiful, not just the beautiful flower, but the calyxes are colored now. The foliage has been picked, you know, for really great looking foliage. They're upright. That lake series, which we have in the back garden back there, which is Lake Salgoon, Lake Titicaca, a bunch of different, they're all lake something. That series was super, super popular amongst folks visiting the garden, but we may have, without exaggerating, 30 plus different salvias here in the garden. And the bees love them, but the rabbits don't. And that's the main thing for us. This is a question I got a ton. There are lots of beautiful things back here on the back pathway. The Pullman area, definitely one of those things that was asked about. This incredible hellebore that has the, you know, the beautiful foliage on it, definitely asked about. But this may have been the most asked about plant back here in the back garden, is this Chinese mayapple. Our native mayapple, which we have as well, is a spring ephemeral. It comes up, blooms, and has gone pretty much dormant. When it's 95 degrees, it's going to go dormant. And we have several spring ephemerals in the garden, native bloodroot, and several other things that are, they come up in the spring, they do their thing, and then they retreat smartly before the heat of the summer. The Chinese mayapple will actually keep its leaves until the fall. It doesn't retreat back underground until fall typically, but that's an incredible leaf. You can see it's quite a bit bigger leaf, more vigorous grower. This one's so young though, I only have one leaf on it. And this area's a little dry for them probably. They do need well-drained soil, but typically would like a little more moist conditions. It has a kind of a burgundy-ish flower on it, which is a little different also than our native mayapple. But that was just this one leaf here on the back path got asked about over and over and over again. Wow, did we ever get a lot of questions about the Agapanthus? And so a lot of folks struggle with Agapanthus, where there are some that are more cold hardy. The ones that we have in our garden are typically zone 8 to 10 perennials, and we're in zone 8A. But a lot of folks struggle with whether they're, you know, with them not coming back. This is one of those plants I put in the group of, you see all the incredible number of native pollinators on this South African native. This is one of those plants I put into the category of, you know, doesn't like winter wet. And so, you know, I don't typically fall plant or late summer plant native grasses and other things that go, when they go dormant, they don't want to be wet. So this is, again, this is an example of that. It's a lot of times they'll go to sleep in the winter and they either don't wake back up in the spring or they wake back up half the size that they were. And a lot of that, again, they just don't like to be wet during the winter time. So we raise them up, or alternatively, we could plant them with some expanded shell in the soil. We can do something to make sure you're putting it in an area that's not going to stay abnormally wet. And otherwise, we just don't have a problem with them coming back. The Ever series is absolutely fantastic. There's Ever Sapphire and Ever, what's the Ever White, and several of those in that series that are just fantastic plants that I highly recommend because they continue blooming. When we think about older Agapanthus, they just kind of bloom out and then they're in this grass-like condition the rest of the season. But these have flower spikes down in the middle of them that are still coming up. So we have these 6 to start with, or 7 to start with, but there's more on their way. This Philadelphus or mock orange was right at the top of everyone's list of questions as well. Typically we see mock orange bloom all out at once in the spring and then they're kind of done for the season. But this Pearls of Perfume bloomed like crazy. I mean, flower to flower, you can actually see the calyx, what's remaining of where the flowers were earlier in the season. It was just flower to flower. We did a little bit of tip pruning on it. It immediately started putting out some new growth, and that new growth is now generating new flowers. So you'll have this full flower and then a continuing flowering all summer long. And I've said before, this thing still had a couple flowers on it in December when we got that hard freeze back in December of 22. But this, again, it's incredibly fragrant, double flowers, which is also an unusual characteristic for mock orange. One other thing I forgot on the folks who had brought us gifts. There was also a box of cookies, and they did not make it out to the back porch. They were very good. Thank you very much for those. A couple things. Steph had gone through and made tags for most of the shrubs in the garden, so luckily a lot of the shrubs were tagged. Perennials and annuals weren't. A few of them were, but she did put tags on most of the shrubs, so I think that was helpful to folks because I saw people taking photos of those all day long. One of the big questions we got was, where is the variegated azalea that they knew was here in the garden? This is Autumn Moonstruck, the newest Encore Zelia. This variegated azalea is absolutely beautiful here in the garden, and getting a ton of sun where it's sitting right here. Doesn't have any problem because, again, I've got a few annual plants around it. We'll keep these cut away a bit so it doesn't damage the shrub. We're not trying to hurt the shrub. But we are keeping the roots slightly cooler by having some things planted around it, and just a fantastic plant. But again, they weren't seeing it and then coming back and asking what it was. This one was, they were seeking it out in the garden to get a look at it, because this has been, the availability is just really ramping up on this plant. But it is a absolutely beautiful Encore Zelia, and this one gets white flowers that start off almost greenish and then become really, really bright white. And of course, it'll come back into flower in the fall. A few other things to talk about in this spot, but first I'd like to say, and Steph just pointed out, that we'd like to thank everybody for treading so lightly in the garden. We had just one plant damaged, and it's under the front. It was right beside, in a spot next to the front bench, where I don't even think they would have seen that there was a plant there. So that was our fault for having a plant under the bench. Other than that, virtually no damage, and have that many people. So thank you guys so much for that, for seeing all the hard work that's gone into this, and having such respect for it. That it says a lot about the audience that's watching the videos here. Definitely the red vein sorrel was right at the top of everyone's list for this. Typically, these will actually retreat a bit during the summertime, and we've done a little more watering than we normally would have. So I think they would have already kind of gone away, but they are perennial. They just come right back up for us later in the in the fall. When it gets cooler, they start to put on new growth again. And so think about them as kind of a winter, a seasonal winter plant. But see, where we're now going to back off on the watering a bit. These are going to kind of fade back into the background, and the impatiens that we have planted behind it will kind of take over this space. So it's kind of layered that way. I like pointing out that during the visit here, if we had this open event next month and the next month and the next month, you'd basically be coming into what seems like a different garden each time, because we have layers of things that will be the next thing. It's kind of what's next. It kind of unfolds during the season that way. This candelabra was asked about a lot. This is Steph's mother's, and it was on their dining room table when she was younger. So it got painted, and it's now a planter here in the garden. And a lot of people were interested in where that had come from. So it's got some history on it. And then the Brigadoon St. John's wort was asked about over and over and over again. Look how vivid it actually is here, even in this kind of heat that we're having now. It's running a bit here and there, but it's super, super easy to control. We tend to mow it down toward the end of February. Sometimes you don't have to, but if you do, the new foliage coming back looks a lot better than the blend of last year's foliage and this year's foliage. So looks a lot better that way. But once or twice a season with most ground covers, you're going to have to address how far they're running. It may be a spot you want them to run into, but quite a lot of times, this one's trying to eat the distilleum back here, so I'll get that under control a bit. But Brigadoon was high on the list of questions, and you can see why. Such a bright spot here in the garden. I've lost control of the tomatoes in the garden. We've been so busy trying to get ready for this open garden and some other travel things that we had done that I lost a little control of taking suckers out and getting them tamed, pinned up. But we have just an incredible number of tomatoes over there. I enjoyed picking them and giving them to folks while they were here, the few that we did have ready. But we're gonna have buckets in the next few weeks, more cucumbers than we can eat already. Peppers, just, this is great pepper season when it's 95 degrees and hot outside, but that's good pepper weather. And the okra doing the same thing. The okra is just getting started. But that was one thing about that is I kept pointing out to folks, those tomatoes have not been fertilized. So that was soil cube compost we've added a few times. I tilled it the first time 4 years ago, but since then it has not been tilled. In the walking paths in the vegetable garden, there's wood chips just like the paths out here. And where the wood chips are is where we'll plant vegetables next time. Right, and then the composted parts where the plants are right now will get wood chips. So we just rotate back and forth those spaces so that the wood chips breaking down each time, they're preventing weeds right now in the beds, and they're also breaking down and becoming compost. But I've not fertilized those. You know, the entire garden got fertilized back in February, late February, early March with a organic fertilizer. I will fertilize those based on observation. That's what I kept telling people. I fertilize based on observation. Why? If you look at those tomatoes, which are absolutely full of tomatoes, they're full of flowers, they're growing like, literally growing like weeds. Why would I need to fertilize that? I don't want to push that. I don't want to say, hey, I want you to go even more for me. So I'm fertilizing based on observation, and that was one of the questions I got. How are you fertilizing? I'm not. There are a couple annual things out here that I think are a little slow right this minute. So there's some pentas and a couple other things over here that I think I do need to fertilize. Our other annuals in the garden are growing, as you saw in the front garden out there, are growing just fine. So I'm gonna, again, if they slow down at all later in the summer, I'll hit them with fertilizer based on that. But the compost and the other soil prep that we've done are plenty to feed them for the most part. For the most part. One big thing, and I'm gonna wrap this up with this, was that a lot of this, how is everything so lush questions. Well, we did a little bit more watering than we would have normally done leading up to this event because we wanted the garden to look the best, right? So I did do it a little bit more watering than I normally would have. But one of the things about how fast everything grows here and how lush and how full it is was at the beginning of this project, I didn't start from some of the tougher situations that you guys may be starting from. And I want to explain that real quick. One thing is this was mowed, basically mowed weeds. It was a lawn, right? And, but it was really just mowed weeds for like 75 years. So you just keep mowing those weeds for all that time. There was no equipment on it other than a lawnmower. There was no chemical fertilizers added to it. They weren't liming it over and over and over again. They weren't building up salts using fertilizer. So it didn't have the compaction from having equipment on it. So there's a lot of things that when you're starting a new garden, let's say you're buying a new house and you're converting a Bermuda lawn into beds, that space may be super compacted. It may have had lots of salt fertilizers applied to it over the years. You're probably starting with a different group of issues, right? Or it's a brand new construction and the builder came in and stripped all the topsoil off and you're just down to basically subsoil. And maybe they put a coating of something they called topsoil on top of it. So you're starting from a much more difficult situation that's going to require a little bit more patience for your soil to improve, okay? So by coming into a space where basically weeds had been able to just, green things had been able to grow without being disturbed other than mowing them once a week or whatever for, whatever amount of times that was per year, actually had the soil in pretty good shape. So when we came in here and buried it in wood chips, the wood chips really started to break down very quickly. Whereas if you don't have a base of microbial activity already happening in your soil, it may take a little while longer to get started. So that's one thing I want to point out is there's a certain amount of patience. And the other thing I kept pointing out was these plants are the icing on the cake. Okay, the cake is built in the soil, right? What we did to this soil by adding compost and by adding wood chips and being patient for a minute. Again, yours may require more patience. I just want to let you know that I didn't. I started from a slight advantaged position because no one had abused this soil in all of those years. You would say they weren't taking care of it because some people might because they didn't have a perfect lawn or a perfect whatever. They were actually doing the soil a favor by staying off of it and just mowing it all of those years. But think of your soil as the actual cake, okay? And that the plants that you're putting on top of it are the icing. If we start with the icing and then wonder what's going on and why they're not performing and why why you're having to water maybe a little bit more than others are watering, or why the water's running off the lot when it rains instead of soaking down into the ground. You know, you may want to back up a bit and learn from it. You know, observation. We learn from observation. We learn from things that we tend to learn from things that aren't going perfect, right? If everything's going perfect, then you don't ask questions about it. You just go, wow, it's going perfect. But when things are going slow, that's when questions arise and you start to learn. And if you're putting additional beds in the future, it may be best to cover them in some sort of organic material for some period of time and wait a year for that space to really improve, and for the earthworms and all the other microbial activity. I kept pointing out as people were walking on these paths how spongy they are, and that was life under their feet. You know, they're walking on life. If I take about 2 inches of these wood chips off, you can see all of the mycorrhizal. You know, it's just like an interconnected web. This is like the World Wide Web of beneficial fungi under the ground taking care of these plants. But that may take a minute at your house. It may take a little while longer, just based on the abuse that land took leading up to you owning it. It could have been an old farm. That was another example, with an old piece of farmland that had just been basically used to nothing, you know, and then they sold it, you know, for a housing development. So patience. You know, that's one of the things, you know, that I like to talk about. And I realized as people were here and they were asking questions about it, I probably haven't said that enough, that there's a slight advantage here, having inherited a space that had not taken the kind of abuse that your space may have had before you're getting started on your garden. And yours may require a little bit more patience to get there. But there's some of the questions, and we really enjoyed having everyone in the garden. It's just such a great group of people. And I think I said in the Sunday question and answer video that it doesn't go over our head that the reason that we're able to travel and go see great gardens and bring the content that we're able to bring to you guys is because you guys watch and participate and, you know, showed up here at the garden. And even if you didn't show up at the garden, we got great notes and comments about they wish they had been here and all those kinds of things. So thank you guys so much for following along, and thanks for watching.